Welcome to the Stories Create Moments podcast, the podcast where we talk about how stories and books can help children connect with themselves, their peers, their communities, and the world. Today on Stories Create Moments, we're talking about adventure, courage, and the idea that even when we all have the same goal, the paths we take to get there can be very different. My friend, Ann Copeland, hiked to Everest Base Camp a few years ago with her father and a friend. Along the way, she learned that no two climbers face the mountain in exactly the same way. We're going to hear some of her stories, play a fun game, and I'll also share a middle grade book that I really enjoyed that connects directly to Everest. And thank you for joining me on Stories Create Moments today. I'm really excited that you're here. Aside from being excited about hearing about your Everest adventure, I also know you personally, and I know you're a wonderful, wonderful person, and you have a lot of insights to share. So I'm really excited that you're here with me today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be a guest. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, there's a delay.
We're delayed again, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay. I am 46 years old. I hiked Everest 4 years ago, or Everest Base Camp, let me be clear, just Everest Base Camp 4 years ago. I have 4 beautiful children. 1 girl and 3 boys. 2 have left the nest and 2 are still here. I've been married 25 years to my college sweetheart. We've lived in Texas for 23 of those years, but I grew up in Utah amongst the mountains and the nature, and that's where I kind of developed my love for mountains. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and the 5 below me love adventure. We grew up doing adventure all the time. If it was riding bikes across the country or camping, extreme. My dad had a fear of letting us live an ordinary life, so all of our vacations were kind of built around this model of his. I was always known as the wimpy one in the family. Like, oh yeah, if Anne's going, we don't know, right? So I think I had a little something to prove to my siblings as well as myself when I took on the adventure of base camp.
And I do remember you sharing in the past about going on a long bike ride with your dad, a multi-day bike ride, and so that was part of your adventures, I think, that you had growing up.
Yeah, it was when I was 16, barely 16. My dad had his bike out of our driveway in Orem, Utah to the border of Canada. So it was about 1,000 miles. The route we had to take was about 1,000 miles. It took us about a month, and let's just say I'm not built for that. They did not invite me on any others after that.
Oh, okay. Well, you got a pretty cool adventure when you went to Everest. I wanted to set the tone for this episode with a quote from George Mallory. George Mallory, most people know George Mallory was really a pioneer of Everest and in the climbing world. And in the early 1920s, he attempted to summit Everest 3 times. On his last attempt, we don't know if he made the summit or not, but we do know that he didn't make it off the mountain, unfortunately, and sadly, he passed away. His body was later recovered in the 90s, but he had a real love for Everest and was really driven by this internally to conquer the summit of Everest. And once he said, "People ask me, what is the use of climbing Mount Everest? And my answer must at once be, it is of no use. There is not the slightest prospect of any gain whatsoever. Oh, we may learn a little about the behavior of the human body at high altitudes, and possibly medical men may turn our observation to some bit of gold or silver, not a gem, nor any coal or iron. If you cannot understand that there is something in man which responds to the challenge of this mountain, and goes out to meet it, that the struggle is the struggle of life itself, upward and forever upward, then you won't see why we go." I really love that. I love the imagery of struggling upward, and I love the imagery of going out to meet the challenge of the mountain and applying that to the challenges we face in our lives. And I know today we're going to focus on what you learned. One of the things you learned, I'm sure you learned many things, but one of the things you learned was we can all be attempting to reach the same goal, but we can all take different paths to get to it. So let's jump in, and with that, let's hear, what was it? Can you take us through what set you out on the path and the decision to climb to Everest Base Camp? Because everybody thinks of Everest, oh, these people that climb Everest and summit Everest, but even getting to Everest Base Camp in and of itself is a huge process and a huge undertaking and a huge challenge. So can you take us on what led you to that decision and how that came about?
Absolutely. So, as many of you knows who are Everest enthusiasts, in 1996 there was one of the biggest tragedies that's happened on the mountain, and there was a book written about it called Into Thin Air. And I remember that was one of the first books that I really, really grasped and loved every part of. And so I kind of became Everest obsessed, not with the idea of climbing it myself, just the idea of why people did it, what it gave them, similar to what the quote you read at the beginning says, of like, you won't understand until you've tried something like this, essentially. Everest Base Camp hike came to, which I had never even planned to do Everest Base Camp hike, but the idea of seeing the mountain really got to me. And I like to blame it on a girlfriend that I ended up going, but who didn't join me on the trip, essentially. She had just gone through a divorce, and she said, I need to feel something for myself. I need to do something big for myself. I need to go on a trip. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll go wherever you want to go. Like, I was trying to support her. And I thought we were going to be on a beach in Maui or something like that for a week, just really rejuvenating. And she says, I want to hike to Everest Base Camp. And I was like, okay, let's take on one of the biggest trekking there is, let's go. So we had trained for a full year and trained together. And then this was in 2020 when we had our first scheduled trek. And because of COVID, it got delayed a year. Well, unfortunately, she had to get a full-time job. And she was a teacher, so she couldn't go anymore. We had invited my dad on the trip as well, who is probably the strongest hiker I know, as well as a month before we left, I pulled in another girlfriend and was like, hey, you've got 30 days. You want to go with me? Luckily, she was in shape, didn't have to plan much, and we set off as the trio to go hike. But it was my dad and a friend, and that was how it started. It was just kind of somebody else's dream that turned into mine.
That's amazing. I haven't read the book Into Thin Air, but I've seen the movie that was made of it, and it is quite the story. So it's very captivating. When you decide to go to Everest and you fly there, before you even get to the place where you're going to climb up to base camp, you land in Nepal. And most people, I think, land in Nepal. What was that like when you landed there and you were immersed in that environment? Can you kind of walk us through what that looked like and sounded like?
Yeah, we spent almost a full week in Nepal before we started climbing. Well, maybe 5 days before we started the trek. And so we fly into Kathmandu, and first impressions were I think it's the most culture shock I've had when traveling, because it is so different. It's very crowded, busy city, definitely not first world. There's some beautiful parts, of course, but there's a lot of poverty. The people are very kind, like a peaceful people. I think the biggest thing that caused culture shock, though, was the food is just sold out on the streets in giant bags and on cardboard tables with no air conditioning, with meat laid out, and dogs sitting underneath the meat and flies flying around it. And I was just like, where am I at? Their electricity and wiring system is just like a big knot of wires up on a pole. And I'm like, poor electrician that has to figure that out when one house loses power. And then monkeys everywhere. They're nesting in the wires. They're climbing all over you. Tons of monkeys. The other culture shock was when we went into a restaurant, you often sit on the floor around a low table and people eat with their hands, all different types of food. So shoveling it in with a little spoon of your hand. Getting silverware was a rarity. I think they know when you're a tourist and they gently hand it to you, but that was a big culture shock. But the people are a very religious people, very kind. They have temples everywhere, all over the street corners. In fact, anything really qualifies as a temple. It doesn't have to be this big elaborate thing. If they've dedicated a certain area or space to being holy, that is considered a temple, and people will leave offerings. So there was a bump in a curb, and somebody decided that was a temple, and so there was offerings left near this bump in the concrete. My favorite story of the temple is a man was traveling through Nepal on a trade route, and he had been carrying a big thing of rice with him. And it's heavy, obviously, and he'd been trekking for days, and he set it down in kind of the middle of town, and he was so tired that when he went to pick it back up, he couldn't get it back up. He was just so heavy. And he believes that's because that was where it was inspired to be a temple. So he left the rice there, and they built a temple around this bag of rice, and they call it the rice temple. Essentially, they go and they worship, and offerings are made there and things like that to their gods. Most religion there is Buddhist. Most of the people are Buddhist, and lots of religion integrated in everyday society. There's prayer rolls, which are these big circular beams, essentially, that you rotate clockwise, and they are filled with prayers of people, chants from the Buddhist religion, different things like that, and they have them in there, and they'll change these prayers out according to who's put the prayers on the temple into the temple to be put in these scrolls. And you roll them and you do them clockwise, and each turn represents one chant of the prayer. So when you spin them, they'll turn quite a few times, which is meaning you are pleading with the gods in behalf of this person on the prayer, or chanting this prayer. So I thought that was a cool thing. So everywhere we went, our guides, everyone that was with us, would always turn those prayer rolls as we walked by.
Interesting. So the prayer rolls are something that they just use in everyday life, all day long, wherever they're at?
Yeah, they'll have them on the street where you can just put, twist them as you walk by, or a bunch in a row. Some have them around their neck, and they have like a spinner on them. But they really are everywhere. Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting.
And I believe you're supposed to do it with your right hand. Yeah, I think you're supposed to spin it with your right hand, something with cleanliness to do. I can't remember the exact hand you're supposed to use, but there's definitely clockwise and with a certain hand.
Okay, that's interesting. I saw a video recently talking about in Africa, you use your right hand to eat because your left hand is used for other stuff that's not as clean. So I wonder.
Yes, that's essentially what it was. It was cleanliness. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
It is.
Okay.
It's the same. Yeah.
Okay.
I just can't remember which hand they use, but yeah, it is a cleanliness thing.
Okay. Very interesting.
Sorry. One other thing I was going to say is there's a lot of pagodas in Nepal, in Kathmandu, that look like the ones that you would picture in China or Japan. And I asked why there was so many there, and they said actually they began in Nepal, and the trade route of goods went through Nepal to China, and they picked up the look of the buildings and that pagoda look from Nepal. So it's native to there, not China or Japan, which is where we see them most often now. There were tons there.
I think that's very interesting how other cultures pick up different styles or different things from other cultures, and it would be interesting to learn more about that from all different cultures. Well, once you've gone, and you said you spent a week in Nepal, once you've spent that time there, then you're ready to begin your climb to base camp. What did that look like? And this is really the bulk of the interview. I know the local community is spread along your path with Sherpas and I think other people. And so what was that like, interacting with the community? How was that the same or different from your traveling companions experience? And I know that you're going to talk more about that and that you have a story to share with that. Just what was the overall experience like?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question. I love it. So the first thing, your first taste of the Himalayas, your first taste of the Himalayas is you get on a 15-passenger airplane. That's a prop plane. And now you have to go into another airport that's higher up on the mountain, and it's the Tenzing Hillary Airport. Also, the town's name is called Lukla. You take this little plane, and it feels so primitive, and it feels like you shouldn't be doing this, but you're flying in between these giant mountains up to where we're going to land, essentially. And it's known as the most dangerous airport in the world. It's the shortest runway. The runway is 1,729 feet long. And in order to stop the planes in time, there's an 12% grade on the runway up toward the mountains so that it can stop it in time. And then also to gain speed as it takes off, because it's not very long. It's only I think it's about 70 feet wide, something in there. So it's very narrow. That part alone, everyone says if you can do that, you're going to be fine. You can do the rest of the hike. But that was intense. But the first taste I had of these enormous mountains, bigger than I've ever seen. And the thought came to mind that, um, when you're a kid and your kids are making sugar cookies and they have the sprinkles and they're like slowly doing it and then a just big glob drops on there. I was like, this feels how God created the world. Like he was just like going with the mountains and then a big old glob just fell out because they're everywhere there, right? It's just so many mountains in one spot. And that's how I was just like, this is where the sprinkles spilled. They got everywhere.
That's funny.
So that part is intense, but so I mean, yeah, so cool. It is really neat. The trek starts, so we have a team as we go up. I mentioned my dad and my friend were the two, Marisa Yelsey and my dad, Richard Wilson, were the two on our trek. My dad was 69 years old at the time. Then we have a team, and the team consists of two guides, his name is Pasong, and the other one was Dillip. And they were our two Sherpas. They are natives to the area. They know the mountain so well. They've hiked Everest themselves a few times. And then along with that, you have two porters that carry the bulk of your luggage up to the next spot for each night. They'll bring like your sleeping gear and everything else. You just pack with you about 15 to 20 pounds of things you'll use that day. So extra food, drinks, you carry 4 to 5 liters of water with you and you drink that every day. This kind of the routine of how you'd start. You'd have to make sure you get your water prepped, your backpack prepped with layers because the weather would change throughout the day, and then your night stuff was carried up to you. And our porters' name were, I try not to butcher their names, but Chandra and Concha were our two porters. And I'd be surprised if they weighed over 100 pounds. They were the tiniest little guys. They carried well over their weight every night. Because they take 2 or 3 packs, it was just like, they're an impossibly strong people. I admire, that's part of something I loved about that, was their strength. As far as the trek goes, it's some statistics of the trek. It's a 12-day trek, and the elevations from the airport Lukla start at 9,350, and base camp ends at 17,598 feet. There is a hike you do the day after base camp that puts you around 18,500, but base camp's about 600 feet. Every day you hike between 5 and 10 hours. You start early in the morning, and the first thing you do in the morning is you wake up and they take your pulse ox to see how much oxygen you're getting in your blood, right? And in the United States, if you went into the doctors and had your pulse ox taken and it was a 93, they would put you in the hospital, right? If it's a 94, they're like, 95 even, they're questioning. As long as you were above 70% oxygen, you could go.
Oh, wow.
So it shows how little air you're getting. It's kind of crazy. I stayed around low 90s, 80s some days, but my dad suffered a little more and his oxygen was high, mid 70s most of the time. After you do that, they write all that down, and it is rather intense. So after you do that, then you have a breakfast. One thing about altitude is your systems start to shut down anything that's not necessary. So your body is working on keeping the vital organs going. So when I say at altitude, that usually just means you're in high altitude situations, right? And this whole trek is in high altitude. So it is really hard to digest. You don't want food, you're not hungry, but I'm about to burn 5,000 calories today, I have to have food. But it's like pushing it down into your body because you just don't want to eat. And your body, it's because it's digesting slow, it's not showing hunger pains, it kind of goes away. And so morning breakfast was probably like, I dreaded it every day. Like I have to get this really random thick pancake down that they make on the mountain, and it's hard to do. The other thing is everything that is brought up the mountain has to be hiked up. There's no roads, no cars, no transportation except walking. So they have this trek. So everything that you get as you go along the trek has been hiked up. So let me give you an idea of this scene of what it looks like in this valley as you hike up. We are literally hiking through villages where people live year-round. Their main source of income used to be farming, and there are tons of terraced farming and potatoes, a big potato industry up there, and it's all terraced, and you can see them working the farms still up on these hills, and with their ox pulling a plow. I mean, it feels like you go back in time. And that used to be the number one, and they live there year round, right? Now, tourism has kind of changed that a bit to where they have built these, they call them tea houses. They're like kind of a really primitive bed and breakfast because a family will live in the tea house and they give you a concrete room made of cinder blocks, so it's freezing in there. And it's like a wooden bench that you lay your bedding on. They do have padding for you there, so you don't have to bring a pad. But all I can think of is how many people have slept on this padding that's not been washed because there's not an easy way to dry it up there, and all these things. So I was like, that was hard for me at first to be like, it's fine, that's blood, it's fine. I don't need to know whose blood it is.
Yeah, that would be hard for me too.
Gross.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part took some getting used to for sure. So when you trek, you end up at this tea house and you eat breakfast there before you leave, and then in the middle of the day there'll be one along the trek amongst houses and things, and that's where you always stop for early afternoon tea. And I'm not a tea drinker, and so this was new to me, and it's actually required that you drink this tea because it helps with altitude sickness. So it's not good, it's black tea, and you drink it, but it helps you acclimate and it helps your stomach settle. So every day you drink the tea, and then you'd hike a few more hours and you do lunch at a different tea house. And then by the time you finished up your day trek and got for dinner, you're at the final tea house where you'd spend the night. It's really neat to just be, well, it's also very humbling to be walking along and thinking you're doing great and you're huffing and puffing, and some kid's running up the hill to go play with his friends like it's no problem, and you're like, how are you getting air? How are you running?
It really is amazing, and I'm sure I'm cutting you off here.
So that part.
But it really is amazing that these people, two things, these people grow up there so they're completely acclimated to this altitude. And then the other thing is, it's amazing that they've just created this system for climbers with Everest where they have your stopping points and they help you along the way to get there.
Yeah, they really are invested in you succeeding, which is very sweet. And I know there's some controversy with Western climbers coming in and kind of taking over and using this as, especially those who hike to the top of Everest. There's some discourse between the Sherpa people and the Western climbers and the government because it's very expensive to do, but the actual people that help you get up there aren't paid a lot. The government takes most of it. And so although that discourse is there, you don't feel it. They're very good to you. But there is a lot of underlying political stuff that's going on with these climbers.
That's too bad.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to watch. So our Sherpas were saying that it's hard because the farming definitely doesn't pay much as the climbing industry does, right?
Right.
And the trekking. But if there's a year like COVID, then they suffer. Or there's a time where they can't get up, or it's a time that the mountain isn't accessible. They really do suffer. And so, like for instance, normally flying into Lukla every day, there's 70 flights with 15 people on them. The year we went, there was 2 a day. Wow. So it was definitely low, and the people were suffering.
Oh, that's that's very
so that
unfortunate.
part's a little hard to watch.
Yeah.
So the coolest thing you see though is like this one tea house we're sitting at, 15,000 feet up in the air, or up on the mountain, and we're sitting in this. They try to make it so comfortable for you. This kind of this swanky little cafe, and we wanted fresh fruit so badly because you just don't get that ever up there. And so we found this place that made like these smoothies, and we were in heaven. So we sat there drinking a smoothie, looking out across the way at a family plowing a field with an ox in the full Tibetan clothes, and the kids burying the seeds as they plowed along. And I'm just the juxtaposition of where we were and what was happening, and how there's a little bit of guilt for invading their culture, but also immense gratitude that they gave us the privilege to see their parts of the world.
First, I want to comment on the terraced farming. I went with a friend once when I was I had just graduated from college and I was teaching, and I went up to one of the Hopi mesas in Arizona, and they had terraced farming. And that was the first time that I saw anything like that. And it was really stunning and beautiful to see it, and to see how hard these people work. And I imagine it's even more beautiful in Nepal in the mountains there. But it really is quite a remarkable thing, this terraced farming.
Yeah, it really is. And to even think that something grows up there, because it's like the first few days you're below the tree line and you can see that it's plush and things, but when you go further up and you just see this farming on the side of the mountain, you're like, how are they harvesting anything up here? But the bottom part of the hike is this big valley, and this beautiful blue river runs through it, like this milky blue river runs through the bottom. It's kind of where the whole valley drains into and comes along. So you follow that gorge for the first few days, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Like, I'd go just to see that. Even if you don't want to hike to base camp, everyone should at least go and do that first day or two, just to kind of see the beauty that's in the earth. You know, living in Texas for 23 plus years, we don't get to appreciate it that often, but just how diverse the world is in not only people but landscape. It's incredible.
I also love that, you know, when you think about these people, and you said it feels like we're invading their space, their culture, their home, but also they're meeting so many people from around the world, which must feel pretty remarkable to them when they stop and think about it.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, as we're hiking to base camp, we get to be around tons of different cultures that, for me, right? There was people from Russia, Ukraine, there's hikers from all over the world in teams. And and these are the true hikers that are hiking the mountain, but everybody has to trek up. Because if you just take a helicopter to base camp, you don't acclimate correctly. So you have to trek up in one way or another. And so this was just like, you know, their warm up, as it's literally my Everest, but it's their little warm up. So you get to see lots of different cultures and lots of different types of people. My dad has a love for languages, although he speaks none. But he only speaks English and Dutch, but he loves languages. So he would listen in on every conversation and then be like, "Dat svidanya," and then they'd speak back, and he's like, "That's all I got." That's all I got.
That's funny.
But talking about that community that you mentioned, it is. I love it. So talking about a kind of a story that comes to mind when you mention that is, so the whole day you see porters bringing stuff higher up on the mountain, right? Higher up for different tea houses, to build buildings, and their packs are enormous. So at one point, my dad saw this kid, and we asked the kid how much he weighed, and he weighed 110 pounds. A little tiny frail boy. And they carry the packs with everything on their back and then a strap across their forehead to pull the weight. So it's different than how we would use a pack, but they all use their necks and their forehead. And we were at kind of a resting spot, and my dad said, "How much does your pack weigh?" And we figured out it was about 189 pounds worth of stuff. And my dad, he's an ox. He's like hiked every mountain he can, biked across the world. You know, he's just a big, tough dude. And he put that thing on, and he stumbled a few steps forward, had to have help balancing it, and stumbled right back to where he started. And it just kind of made me think about this young boy that doesn't weigh a lot is able to carry this, but he didn't start carrying that. He started small. He started with a smaller pack and worked his way up to this. And I think that's a great life lesson, is like, we see these goals and we want it right away and we want to get there quickly. And especially in the generation we live in now, where everything is fast and immediate, and we get instant results, and our food is there in 10 minutes, and everything is fast. And the patience that it probably took this boy to work up to 189 pounds, probably more than he ever thought he could carry. It's way more than he actually even weighs, right, on his back. And it just kind of made me think of, like, that's a big step in goal setting. Like, we have to start small and be happy with those small victories. as we move forward, right? And grow to carry the heavier load. Sometimes it feels like that load is so heavy and we can't carry it all at once, but that's when we have other people to help support the sides and help you take a few steps and things like that as you build up to a higher strength within yourself and emotional resilience.
Oh, I love that. I love that story and that analogy. And I think it's really true. And I know there's going to be parents and teachers listening to this, focused, really focused on middle grade type learning and situations. And so I hope that this is something that they can share with their students. I feel like middle grade kids are at that age where they're really learning a lot. They're immersed in figuring out who they are and where they want to go, and I think it can be easy to get overwhelmed then in high school and even as adults if we see someone who can carry more than we can carry metaphorically. But just remembering that what you said, that we can start and grow from where we're at, and before we know it, we're carrying a 189-pound pack.
Right, we're carrying more than we ever imagined we could carry. So our goal becomes even bigger than we thought we could do, right?
Right.
And it literally towered above him. I think the comparison thing is a great value in this because there are different types of people and different, in life that we meet that we seemingly try to compare ourselves that can do more. And instead of just seeing what we can do, we're looking and comparing, right? And that's the enemy to success is comparison. It will ruin your self-esteem. It takes you down. And so I think setting reachable small milestones builds self-esteem, right? Like, for instance, when I started to train for this, I hadn't worked out in 15, 20 years. Like I had not even ever worked out consistently. And so when I went and joined this, I went and joined Orange Theory, and they said, so what are your goals? And I was like, the Everest Base Camp. It just jumped huge, right? And I just felt so overwhelmed, like, what am I doing? Like, my goal is Everest Base Camp, and I can't even walk a mile. And so I started to be overwhelmed at first working out, like, I can't even do this. How am I going to do that? This type of thing. But then I just got to setting short-term goals. Okay, we're going to walk this mile and we're going to walk this at this speed. And as soon as I hit that one, I was like, yes, you did it, right? There's some self-esteem building and capabilities. And then I would try for a little further and a little further. And it took a solid year to where I was like, maybe I could do this, right? So instead of just having that end goal and getting so paralyzed by the end goal, sometimes we miss the little milestones that are beautiful and the lessons we learn on the way. Instead of being so overly focused on the end result, sometimes we don't look around, right? And that applies to the mountain. Sometimes if we're just looking at the end, how many more days, I would have missed all this beauty, all the lessons that you can learn in life and life skills that you build toward yourself as you do something like this. And so as everyone, keep your eye on the dream, keep your eye on the goal. That's great, but enjoy the journey. Look to these small victories. When your kids have a small victory or they read their first book, that's huge, right? That's big. You celebrate that instead of, oh, I want to be a good writer. Okay, well, you read your first book. We're so proud. Just things like that are equally as satisfying along the way.
I love that. I love that so much. I know that going back to the theme that we established was everyone takes different paths to get to the goal. So the three of you had this goal to get to base camp. But I know, and you have a story about your dad. So why don't you go ahead and share that now?
Yeah. So my dad has done tons of hiking, but he's never done altitude hiking. And so altitude is tricky because you don't know if your body handles it or not. There's nothing you can do to prepare yourself to handle altitude. You either have it or you don't, and you don't know until you're there. And so it has nothing to do with strength. If that were the case, I wouldn't have been able to make it, right? But it has nothing to do with that. It's in you or it's not. And my dad, our first few days, I want to say it was a couple days in, we had reached about 14,000 feet. And 14,000 feet, my dad started to he's never had anxiety in his life, and he started having severe anxiety. He couldn't sleep at night. He hadn't slept for 2 nights, and he couldn't eat. And I could hear him just walking up and down the concrete hall all night long, as I'd roll over and go back to bed. He just was not sleeping at all. And he just started to kind of hallucinate, like he closed his eyes and have these horrible dreams. And then he started to put it into, I feel so bad for these people. They have nothing. And then it started just to spiral. And so when he woke up and they asked him all the questions of, can you continue? And they took his levels and things, he was just too low and he hadn't slept. And so the strongest person, arguably the strongest person on our trek, had to turn around and go to lower elevation. From 14,000, he had to go back to 12 or 11.2, and he had to stay there. Wow. And we had a full week left of the trek. I mean, the hardest part coming up. And there's something about, I don't want to cry on a podcast here, but there's something that was so tender about the idea that my dad had prepared me my whole life growing up to be the person I am. And then parents kind of turn into a coach and they watch from the sidelines and they don't hold your hand the whole way, right? And raising kids, we know that. There's a time where we switch over from guide to we're an audience member and we're in the stands or whatever. And that moment when he hugged me, I just had that feeling like he's led me this far. He's taught me what I need to do. And he's going to go back, and now I am going to do this on my own. This is now me. And some of my safety net was having him there because he was trusted and I knew he knew what to do in situations and things like that. And now it was time to launch. And I kind of had this moment where I looked back on all the times and all the things he prepared me, both in life and in hiking and learning things growing up, where now it was my time to prove it. And I think there comes a time, like we're in the preparing part, a lot of us right now with kids, and especially middle grade kids, right? We're preparing, we're teaching, we're helping, we're guiding. And then there's that moment where you step back and let them make the choices. And probably one of the hardest days on the trek for me, having my dad return, being on my own, being scared and vulnerable. And then that same day, the morning that he had to be turned around, we did, in my opinion, the hardest day of the whole trek. So you acclimate, we have some acclimation days. And what acclimation days mean is you get to a certain height and then you think, oh, an acclimation day, I'll stay here and rest at this height. That's not what you do. Unfortunately, what you do is you take a really steep route to the next day's elevation. So you plan for what's coming by doing an acclimation hike. So your blood thickens up. So we were at, I can't remember the exact, but somewhere in the 14s, and we had to hike to 16. So a 2,000 foot gain where you can see the top and you can see the bottom and you're like, oh. So it takes a couple hours. We go up that hike. That's where I started to feel a big lack of oxygen. I spent more energy crying up that hill than I did probably using it to hike. And my friend next to me is like, forever optimistic, cheering us on, like laughing, and I'm like, how is she doing this? Where is she pulling this from? And I just realized that we all have different strengths. I was still going to get there, but I was getting there in a different way that she was. And that goes back to my dad. Like, he wanted to get to base camp, and as we continue on in this podcast, you'll see that he actually did make it to base camp in a different way than he thought. But we all have different capabilities, and we just need to play to our strengths and know, maybe I'm the weak one here, but this person here is cheering me on and I got it, right? We can use each other as a community, but that we all have different strengths, and not to try and fake somebody else's. Our paths are different. Our personalities are different. Our lessons will be different. She maybe didn't learn a lesson that day at all, and I did. I learned how to mentally bring my brain in, just focus on my breathing, shut everything else out, and concentrate on one step at a time. And that I've used tons in my life now, of just mentally closing it all out, focusing in on one thing, being right there in that moment, whether it's advice I'm giving to my kids, whether it's advice for me, whether it's just an internal discussion I'm having, but just to close it all in onto one topic. And that was a skill I developed that day. So we all have different ways of doing it.
I love that. And I hope I'm not cutting you off here with the delay, but I love that. And even when you were talking about earlier preparing for the trip, Marissa wasn't planning on going. It was a different friend that was going to go. But you asked her 30 days before, and she was basically ready. And then you had to do all this training for, I think, a couple of years because you weren't able to go when you originally planned to. And so there was that. And then on the mountain, she had a different approach than you did, different strength, and you had different strengths. I love what you said about cheering each other on. We can all be on the path in different places. We can all have different strengths. But we cheer each other on. We motivate each other wherever we're at with whatever we're doing. She wasn't sitting there criticizing you for struggling in the way you were struggling, and you weren't criticizing her if she had struggles. Just supporting each other and strengthening each other. And I really, really love that.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a big one and right, that's the beauty of what we can try and build in a community. Instead of comparison, we can try and build each other, and wherever we are, we build in our strength and help others along the way. One funny thing that happened with that is the guides said to us once we reached the acclimation spot, they looked at Marissa and said, you should do more altitude climbing. You're really, really good at this. And I'm standing next to her and I'm like, yeah, words for me? Like, and they just looked at me and smiled and didn't say anything. And I was like, got it. I got it. It's not my strength. I get it.
Oh man, that's funny. And
I was like, okay.
I've had that with different things too, where people compliment someone next to me and I'm like, not getting that. Also, thinking about your dad, and you've shared that story with me before but I didn't ever think about your dad turning back. He was the one that was experienced doing all of these things. So turning back kind of left you like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this now without this person who has all this experience that I trust, my dad. And you kind of had to go out on faith that what he had taught you was going to help you, and that you could do it with these Sherpas and the support that you had. But I think that's really, really amazing. And you mentioned our kids, that we need to do that with them and teaching them how to do that, and that it's okay to do that.
Right. I think, I think it was necessary for me to do on my own. Some part of how this was planned, or somehow God's hand in it, it was necessary for me to go on without him. And much to his sadness that he couldn't, it was necessary for me. And I told him, like, that sacrifice that you made, whether you wanted to or not, was for me. And that was part of how this had to go. And I think oftentimes, and I'm not the author of this quote, and I'm not sure where it came from, but it talks about when we do too much for our kids, we are stealing their self-esteem. We feel good about it because now we're a good mom or a good parent, or we did your homework for you, or we helped you, we did the chores for you, or we did this, or we didn't require this of you and just did it. Those things build our self-esteem, but don't build somebody else. We're stealing it from them. We're taking their value of what they can see, what they're capable of. And I think that's where it came down. My dad was like, not knowingly, but like, here you go build your self-esteem by doing this.
Wow.
Instead of me pulling you along.
That's amazing. That's really insightful to think about as a parent. I know you mentioned, well, I think you have more to share, and I know you mentioned that your dad makes it to base camp, so let's hear the rest of the story. It's a good one.
Thanks. So the final day, you spend the night at this really primitive, the most primitive tea house. When you call it a tea house, you're like, I'm pretty sure somebody's died here. Like, it does not look safe. It's very, very scary a little bit, just like dark hallways. It looks abandoned. You literally use the bathroom in a hole in the ground. It's frozen over, so anyone that misses the hole in the ground, you're sliding on their pee. It's kind of a mess. So it's like you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, so gross. But you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, so you spend the night there, you wake up early and you do your routine, and then I think I got down like 3 potato wedges. It was a struggle to eat. And keep in mind, we've had zero protein this whole trip because you can't eat the meat that's on there because it's by the time it gets to those tea houses, it's been sitting in the sun on some porter's back for days. And their stomachs can handle it, but a Westerner's is not used to that. So you couldn't eat any meat. So it's very low energy. Things like at this point, your blood's thickened so much that in the night, like when I wake up in the morning, I'm blowing tubes of blood out. It's just so much thicker. It's just like coagulating. It's just your body's not in a good spot. And there's a reason you don't stay. Yeah, there's a reason you don't stay there very long is because your body's just like, I'm done. So I know that's kind of gross, but it's just the reality of what altitude does to your body. Right. So this is the final push. This is the big long day into Everest Base Camp. So you started a little town called Gork Shep, and you push into base camp. And the rules are you go to base camp, there's a border where you don't pass because that's where the real climbers are going and the ones that are going to attempt a summit. And they don't want any outside sickness brought in. It's kind of its own little biosphere, like they want to keep it pure, right? So there's literally a line that says, trekkers do not cross this path. Oh, and wow. We get there and our guides know everybody that's on the mountain. You know, our guides are like friendly with everybody. And they say, well, we need to go in because I have a friend that needs our help. And we have permission to go in. And we're like, okay. And first of all, just when we get there, I mean, it's just like you're on this high, right? You've done it. You're so happy. Everything around you is amazing. Like you're on a glacier. And so there's just big old spikes of ice sticking out of the ground. You can hear the water running underneath you. You can see these giant crevasses. I mean, it is a village within itself. Just seeing base camp is it feels like you're on the moon. It's so amazing. And there's a full village. It's a full working town. There are hundreds of tents, signs for like areas, like this is this area, this is this, you know, and there's like trails in between it all. Like people live there for over a month, right, mm-hmm. to acclimate and to hike back up and down and things like that. So mm-hmm. It's a full working city. And we're still kind of on this high, you know, with our 3 potato wedges. As soon as we got there, we planned on flipping back around. So we didn't pack a lot of food. We didn't do a lot of extra things. So as we're hiking through this, it's getting a little bit longer and longer and longer. And I'm getting hangry. And I loved our guides, but I'm like, where are you taking us? Like, what's happening? And they were super vague about it. Well, I should see this friend up here and say hi. I'm like, no, I don't say hi to your friend. I started getting kind of chippy, and I wasn't like that the whole trip. But I was like, I don't think I want to see your friend. Can we wait here and you go see your friend and then come back for us? And he's like, no, just a little further. Well, this little further. And then he'd pretend not to hear me. He'd be like, just ignoring me, like, ow.
Oh my goodness.
You hear me. But this time turned into 2 hours into base camp. It's huge. So we've gone from one side of base camp to the other. Mind you, I loved seeing it all, but then I'm thinking of the hike that's ahead of us to get back. And it's long, and it's getting later, and we were only supposed to spend a half hour at base camp due to acclimation. And so we're like breathing really hard. All the things have come to a point, right? And I'm like, this is it. Like we paid you. We need to turn around. Anyway, finally, he just kept pushing forward. We get on this rock, and he's like, just wait here. And we're sitting on this rock, and there's a picture of me, and I am just like angry, right? I'm like, you're ruining this for me? This is blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and unbeknownst to me, we had to go into base camp and get to the helipad, which is what we were sitting on, and I didn't realize that's what it was. And all of a sudden, a helicopter comes around the bend. And if this is anything like the reunion's going to be in heaven, if you believe in a heaven, this is exactly what it's going to be like. The helicopter lands. My dad walks off with the most joyful face I've ever seen, and he looks up at the mountain, and you can see the mountain in the reflection of his glasses, and he just hugs me like we'd been separated for years and gives me this hug, and we all like are crying and loving, and then I'm like, I'm so sorry, I yelled at you guys, totally the best surprise, like trying to keep it a secret. It was this whole thing. But just that reunion of it was lots of apologies having to be given, but that reunion there and realizing we all made it. We all made base camp in a different way. We all made it to our goal. My dad showed up. He had chartered an airplane or a helicopter, and the reason it was so delayed and why we had to keep hiking through was because there was lots of emergency evacuations off of Everest, and we saw maybe 12 of them that day of people being evacuated
Wow.
down from climbing. And so he obviously was not the priority with the helicopter, so it kept getting pushed back and further back and further back. But that waiting and that joy of that reunion and seeing we all did it. We all did it in a different way. And it doesn't matter how you got here. I took the longer route and you took a faster route. It was, different things, different challenges, but we all got here. The goal was the same and the journey is different. And that goes to, I think, how we teach children, how we teach our own, and if you're teachers, how we teach those. The goal can be the same, and there's different routes for everybody. And just because mine was my experience, it is not superior. Just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's the same, it's going to work for everyone. I don't have the monopoly on how to achieve the goal.
And I think that's good to remember from both sides. The person who's achieving in one way and thinks it's the best way to achieve their goal, and the person who's achieving in a different way and thinks the other way might be the best way to achieve the goal. It's good to remember we're on the path that's right for us, and we're gonna get there in our own time, in our own way. I love how you said the goal was the same and the journey was different. The journey was just different, which has its beauty in its own way too for each person.
Right. And we'd be naive to think that it's the same for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're naive to think that it would be the same because we are all so different. And that goes in how we view each other in our daily lives, right? You may do something completely different than I would have done, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong way. Or maybe
Right.
you parent one child or teach one child a completely different way, but it doesn't mean it was wrong because that's not how you learn.
Definitely. And even a parent having 3 kids like I do and parent them all differently because they all have different things that they need. So when you think about this, and I know you shared earlier when you were hiking and you were talking about being in the moment and that you've applied that to your life so many times since then. That was one thing you learned that you've applied in your daily life. What are a couple of other things that you learned on the mountain that you've been able to apply in your daily life that strengthened you as a person and that you've been able to help your kids learn from?
Yeah, I think the obvious one is we are capable of way more than we ever thought. And our ending may not be the end, like what we've decided is the ending in our mind, often is not the ending of how much we can take and how hard it can be where we're like, I'm done, but really you can do a lot more. Sometimes that effort looks like it shouldn't be a lot for somebody, but it is. And I think I've learned to appreciate that every effort toward doing something hard is a win. So I have a child that struggled with, or actually a niece that struggles with social anxiety. And so I talk to her a lot, and instead of like, hey, go up and have a conversation with somebody at lunch and sit by somebody new, that's overwhelming. To learn that she can do something hard, I always said, okay, you're going to smile at a stranger today. Just smile. That's it. And that was way more than she thought she was capable of, just to do one small thing, right? Maybe you're going to read 10 pages in a book where this person has read 150 a day, right? Just these tiny little victories are victories. They may not be big, they may not look the same, but they're victories. And I think I've used that in my life of not getting so like, oh, I didn't get all this done today, or I didn't do this well, but remembering I did this tiny part right, and that's a victory. And to build on that, and then it will be unveiled to you of how much you actually can do. But to take those small wins and count them as a win.
I love that. Especially for people who are all or nothing thinkers like I am and like a couple of my kids are. It's really good to take those small wins and take those successes as they come on the smaller level.
Yeah, that's absolutely one I've applied. I've also applied the idea of meditation, of having a moment to exercise my mental capacity, to be able to strengthen what's important versus what's interesting, and to be able to weed the interesting out and stick to the important.
I love that too. That goes back to what you were saying about being in the moment and focusing on what I think your breathing that you were talking about on the mountain, and focusing on making it through that and weeding out what was important in that moment.
One last lesson that that just popped into my mind is we live in a world of excess. And if we don't have excess, we feel like we're not successful. And one of my Sherpas, Dilip, I really like Dilip. We bonded. He is a very humble man, has very humble home, right? Has never experienced what we would call the world. And he is a happy, happy person. For instance, he was, the last day of our trek, said, "Are you so excited to go see your family?" He has 2 young kids and a wife back at home, and he does this.
Wow.
Trekking. I said, "Are you so excited to go see your family?" He's like, "Yes." I said, "Oh, they're going to love to see you in the morning." And he says, "Oh, I won't see him for 3 days." I said, "Why?" He's like, "Well, I have to walk home." And I just was like, oh my gosh, like, didn't even think that you live in these mountains. It's a 3-day walk. Everything's walking. There's no quick way to get there.
Wow.
And I was like, "Well, is there a faster way? We need to get you there faster." He's like, "No, this is great. I'm happy to walk." And it just kind of made me like sit back and be like, I don't need a lot of the excess. Although my husband would probably differ that I say I don't need it. But maybe we don't need as much as we think we do. We live in excess. We live in trying to fill our schedules to the brim. We live in speed and efficiency. And I really want to adopt some of that culture of just like simplicity, like a walk home.
Yeah, it sounds like he lives the simple life, like you said, and he's finding joy in it. He's finding joy in the walk home. He's finding joy in the excitement of seeing his family. But he doesn't have all of this wealthy house, this nice car, all of these things. He's finding joy in the simplicity, like you said. I love that. That story actually gave me chills, along with a couple of the other stories that you shared.
Thank you.
A few things that stood out to me that are takeaways for me, which I've already shared, but supporting each other wherever we're at on our journeys, recognizing that we have different strengths. We can take our own path, and it's okay if we're not following the same journey as other people. Just appreciating what's around us and appreciating different cultures and different people, and those were the things that I took away from your stories and your experience.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Every time I review this story, I find new things and new lessons that I reflect upon and love. And I think my final statement of like what I would say is we need to do things that are hard. We need to choose to do things that are hard and not just the ones placed on us. I try to do something every day that I really don't want to do. To get out of my comfort zone, whether it's socially, emotionally, physically, I try to do something that I don't want to do. Because when maybe the heaviness of life gets to us, or the sorrows of life get to us, we will be better trained to do the things we don't want to do to get through that. But you have to train that. You have to train that willingness of getting out of what's comfortable and doing something that's not fun, And a lot of kids will say, "Oh, that's school." Well, find something that's not in your routine to do that's not fun, and it will train it'll build self-esteem. It'll train you for when those harder times do come.
Wow, I love that. I love, and you had the opportunity to climb to Everest Base Camp, which was definitely a hard thing that you obviously learned a lot from. But I love how you're talking about every day do something hard, do something out of your comfort zone for the reasons that you're sharing. So thank you for sharing that. I think that is a good note to end on, and I really appreciate you coming on this. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm really excited for people to hear your experiences and your stories and the things that you learned. So thank you, Anne. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. I feel rejuvenated for the day just discussing it. I'm ready to go conquer the next. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne.